as there were no roads into this section of the state. As the coal industry grew in the mid-18th century, small coal towns began springing up along the Appalachian landscape. These early towns usually followed the rail lines and were wild, lawless camps comprised mostly of men.
The coal miners had come into West Virginia maybe as early 1870 or in the 70s when the railroads actually came in, and coal got to be a big thing in West Virginia, and something that did bring some money into West Virginia. My people and other people who lived in our hills and who had immigrated to West Virginia from various other countries, in my case mostly United Kingdom, they had, at that time it wasn't that, but nevertheless it is now, from United Kingdom. They had been sent up by choice or otherwise to West Virginia and lived in these mines and dug out a little living up there with as best they could as small farmers in these hills, living on game and whatever they could make a living on. But there was no actual money coming in to speak of. They needed the money when the coal people came in, and of course they welcomed it then for a time because they thought it'd be nice to have some money to spend, that kind of thing.
These early settlements usually did not offer a sense of community. Soon, co-operators began the process of cleaning up their rugged coal settlements. In time, many families filled the homes and streets in these early coal towns. Because of their paternalistic dominance, most co-operators became synonymous with their towns. Such was the case with J.G. Bradley in the town of Widen, West Virginia. President Abraham Lincoln granted a large parcel of Clay County to his then Secretary of War, Simon D. Cameron. His son, James Cameron, a partner in the Elk River Coal and Lumber Association, began building a coal mine and timber mill there in the late 19th century. James Cameron was J.G. Bradley's grandfather.
The story is that Cameron was kind of forced on Lincoln as the Secretary of War out of the 1860 convention, because going into that convention, Lincoln was not the leading candidate for the Republican nomination. So in order to get Lincoln the nomination, several deals were made by some of Lincoln's campaign workers. And part of that was to get the support of the Pennsylvania delegation, which Senator Cameron controlled. Senator Cameron was promised a prominent place in a new cabinet. So he became Secretary of War. Lincoln was not happy with this. Lincoln said the only thing Cameron wouldn't steal was a red-hot stove. He didn't last long in that job. Lincoln soon found a way to make him the Minister of Russia, and of course, Edwin Stanton became Lincoln's most famous Secretary of War and was the Secretary of War throughout the Civil War and played a large part in the Union victory. Senator Cameron came into possession of 102,000 acres in what's today Clay and Nicholas County. Now, whether his less than ethical reputation played any part in acquiring that property, I'm not sure. But regardless, after Senator Cameron or Secretary Cameron's death, his grandson, Joseph G. Bradley, inherited that property. Mr. Bradley was quite remarkable fellow himself. Obviously raised with a lot of, I think, options in life because of wealth and prestige. Graduated from Harvard Law School. And shortly after his graduation from Harvard Law School, at age 22, came to Clay County and decided to develop the property that he had inherited. He came in 1903. He looked at the property, surveyed it, and figured the first thing he needed was a railroad to get back into it. So the Buffalo Creek and Gully Railroad was chartered in 1904. It was built from Dundon, across the Elk River, Clay, to Widen. And I think it's about 18 miles from Dundon to Widen. It was completed in 1905. And when they got to the end of the line, he named the town of Widen after one of the contractors on the railroad. And that pretty much started the whole operation.
So when they first started that railroad, there was a passenger train run 3 times a day, and up from Dundon to Widen. And he said that his dad worked, and it was always filled. That was pretty good, with a passenger train 3 times a day from Dundon to Widen and back. Everything had to go in out on that train, and all of the people that worked there. I know when my mom and my dad went to work at Swandale, they'd get up in the morning and that track would be lined with people, hobos and stuff wanting a job, and they'd hire so many at a time,
Dundon, the oldest of 4 company towns, and is located across the Elk River from the town of Clay. The office of the Elk River Coal and Lumber Company was located here, along with the railroad repair shops.
Of course, the 3 major communities of the Elk River Coal and Lumber Company were Dundon, which the Buffalo Creek and Gully shops were located. Widen, of course, which was the main town, had the coal operation. That's where the company office was at. And then Swandale, which was where the mill was.
And we just thought it was the best place in the world, partly because the railroad ran through the backyard and you could just climb on the train. Our idea was you can climb on the train whenever you want to. And Moon Mullins was on the train, and we thought that was the most fabulous thing in the world, because of his name and the cartoon character called Moon Mullins. And we loved walking on the railroad. We just thought that was neat. I guess we thought you could walk anywhere in the world, and you probably can. From one shore to the other, if you keep walking on the railroad.
Today, the ruins of the BC&G Railroad still remain, but through the efforts of the BC&G Railroad Co-op, the train runs again. Passengers experience the scenic attractions of Buffalo Creek and the natural beauty of Clay County, West Virginia.
But now we're trying to rebuild it by putting this campground together at Dundon and a railroad excursion back up Buffalo. And we hope to accomplish that and complete it in not too long a period. There's, they listed, we'll have 14.5 miles of running track that we're able to put engines and hopefully motor cars on within the near future. The last 6 years, I've hauled, I'd say, over 6,000 people.
Named after stockholder Captain Thomas Swan, Swandale was the lumber town of the company and is located on the lower part of the Buffalo Creek. The Elk River Coal and Lumber Company's dairy farm was situated in the town of Cressmont. In the early decades of the 20th century, production rose at the Rich Run Mine, and so did the number of houses located in Widen. The first houses constructed were single-story dwellings of 3 to 5 rooms. Widen houses were well constructed, but did not in the early days provide the luxuries of indoor plumbing.
No, when I got out on Wyden, I met some of them were older people too. I remember that I talked with them who lived in those houses. Those houses were company houses. However, they were not as much coal shacks as some of the other coal miners had to live in various coal towns or near coal towns. Wyden, at the time that I visited or was allowed to visit the thing in there, it was a fairly decent little town, kind of thing. Now, I don't say they were not as luxurious or anything like that, and I doubt that there was a flush toilet in the whole town, a flush toilet. I don't think so. That would have been a little unusual.
And we had all the conveniences of the outside world. We didn't have to come out of Wyden, really.
No.
We had
store,
retail facilities. So we had banks. We had medical facilities. There was a doctor on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If there's anything serious, they had ambulance service to take you to upgraded facilities. So, we had everything that we needed there. And we didn't make a whole lot of money. We made better money than most people surrounding Clay. But in today's world, it wasn't much. But like I say, nobody made very much money back in the 40s and the 50s.
When I worked for Mr. Bradley, he always paid what the union mines were paying and sometimes more.
Didn't have no business anywhere else because
they furnished it all.
Yeah, we had everything. You had your own doctor, and he made house calls, and if you had to go to the hospital, the ambulance come and got you. And your grocery store was there, and your post office was there, and you didn't have to worry about the bank because you didn't have no money to put in or take out.
Some people try to say this was a kingdom and compare it to a feudal situation, but it was really a very forward-looking social engineering experiment, a virtual utopia, because for 50 years, for the period of time that Bradley built this community, they had everything provided for them. The teachers had the best wages, they had the best schools, they had churches built, so it wasn't just company housing and a company store, they had all that. They had everything else provided, recreation facilities. Their life was much better than anybody in the surrounding area inside this rural, remote little territory. It was completely different from what you could find outside of it. It was a very self-contained utopia. And this is a period of time that in Europe fascism was rising up. And one of the characteristics was in a fascist society, the government and capital and labor were all integrated together in a single organizational structure. And Bradley did this, essentially. So it was a utopia, but it was a totalitarian utopia, that everything was taken care of, cradle to grave. It must have seemed like something out of science fiction to the people that lived there.
Our rent was $9 a month.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a young boy, the company generated their own electricity. They had their own power plant there, and our electric bill was $1 a month. They provided the coal. Everybody heated by coal, and I think
everybody had a coal house.
Everybody had a coal house, and
they delivered a load of coal when you called them or sent word you needed it. You
didn't
call. We didn't have telephone.
Cost you 50 cents a month.
Yeah.
And they had a company store. Well, we had scrip, issued scrip, and and you would go to a script office, and you had a script card, and you would tell them how much you wanted, and they either gave it to you on what you'd already worked out or what you were going to work out in the very near future, and you'd get your script, and then you could spend that at the company store face value. But now if you went out of widen and tried to spend it or some of the surrounding areas, they charge you 10 cents on the dollar. You took a dollar script, you got 90 cents worth of goods for it. But that was convenient. You know, people would draw a script and buy whatever they needed, and really wasn't a lot different from today. In that people are always using these credit cards to buy things, but then we used their old script card.
The house at Dungan was kind of unique. I remember it had screen porch, I think, downstairs when you came in. But my grandmother had it stained dark brown because of the coal dust. You know, she didn't want white walls that would be black all the time because of the soot. And it had little yellow curtains with cherries on them. And I was amazed to see that in Grandpa's living room down here, he was allowed to stack his newspapers like those crazy old people you hear about where you have to sort of tunnel your way through the memorabilia. Well, he saved everything.
The town was clean. If you was there, you know. They had a board fence around each house. They were whitewashed white. And if you had a board come down off of the fence, if you went to the office, they would send men out and repair them. But if you didn't, the superintendent, when he made his round, that was E.D. Kearns, if he come around and found the board off the fence and you didn't turn it in, they would send a repair crew down and put that board back on, but it would cost you $2 out of your pay. If you didn't mow your grass and keep it nice and neat, they would send a repair crew down, they'd mow your grass, and they'd take $2 out of your pay. And $2 back at that time was a pretty good bit of money, so everybody kept their places clean.
Back when they had the contest for the best yards in the town, the ladies auxiliary, or what they called themselves, they went around and judged people's yards, and they had a wooden duck, had Yard of the Month wrote on it.
Set on your bass.
Yeah, and if your yard was the best, you got the duck set in your yard. This one woman, she worked like a trooper to get her yard cleaned up and everything, so she could get the Yard of the Month duck, and she didn't get it, and she was telling Arden Hokum, he was kind of a joking like fire and talk kind of slow like, and she telling him about not getting a duck for the best yard, and he told her, he said, using his terms, he said, they're going to make you one and going to write asshole the town on, said you'll get it every month.
One interesting fact, I think you have to remember that this was private property. If law enforcement came in, they had to have a warrant. But everything I've always heard, there was not much of a need for law enforcement because Bradley policed his own towns. If somebody got out of line or there was some unruly behavior, usually it just took a letter from Bradley saying, fix the situation or you're out of a job. And usually that was enough. Was that some, you may ask, was that rule with an iron hand? Well, it may have been, but it was effective.
One of the things I will say, too, as far as behavior expectations, as long as I said as you did your job and you worked and so forth, you had a job. If you had children that should have gone way astray, your job could be in jeopardy.
I think he was a benevolent dictator. that he did really good things for them, materially speaking, economically speaking. Socially, he provided for needs that weren't being met elsewhere. As far as oppressive, he controlled their lives. And if you stepped out of line, you probably really regretted it.
And the company also was in control of the town. You didn't get too far out of line, or your parents' job was on the line. So that was something that you had to consider. And kids, they realized that, you know, they had to. There wasn't a lot going on in there. There was a few episodes here and there, you know, but like I say, the company was in control.
I think that they were really his life. And that when he came down here as a young man, he came from Harvard and from kind of a not a cosmopolitan background, but I mean Washington, New York, Boston. He roomed with Franklin Delano Roosevelt at college.
But you're forgetting his Pennsylvania connection.
He had
quite
been
rural.
Brought up in Mount Joy, Pennsylvania, where my great-grandmother lived, and that was rural. And he seemed to have an appreciation for rural people and rural life, and I think what he considered real, you know, genuine people, and he genuinely liked people. In terms of philosophy, he was often an old curmudgeon, and prejudiced. But if you sat him next to somebody, I don't care what color they were or what their political persuasion might be, he would genuinely like them for themselves, you know. And that was very clear. But somehow he really kind of fell in love with the job and with the people. It must have been very early on, way before my time, because he really, he believed in this place. He wanted people to succeed. He wanted people to have a chance. And he was very distressed when miners would get paid and blow it all on alcohol on Saturday night. I heard him say that. Why can't they just put their money in the bank and save it, you know? And so he was really very concerned for the towns, the welfare of the towns, and that people should lead a good and decent life.
Like many of the early coal mining towns in Appalachia, the residents of Widen had very strong ties to religion. Miners who constantly lived with the threat of death had religion as a solace. If death were to come in the mine, knowing that salvation was in store for them gave miners comfort in their long hours of toil.
My dad was a preacher, and he was an ordained preacher. And there's a little church as you go up Dog Run called Pleasantdale, and that's where we started going to church at, and that's where he was ordained at. And he held the church, preached at the church, and never was a pastor in Widen, but all the others around he was. I don't know why, but there was a little bit of politics going on as to who the preacher was in Widen. And the company had a little bit to do with that, you know. You had to be approved whether you were going to be a preacher or not. And there was politics mixed up in that.
My dad's a Republican. My mom's a Democrat. My dad was a Methodist. My mom was a Baptist. And I said back then, we had drugs because I was drugged to church every Sunday, every Wednesday night.
They always have communion meeting and feet washing. And I remember, as such a little girl, what I remember. My grandmother Whaling, grandmother Sizemore, was washing her daughter's feet by Grandma Whaling's. And she shook her hair down and dried her hair, praising, shouting all at the same time.
I was at Agnes Davis this week. I've done a little work for her. She was telling me that when she was a kid, she was raised in Nicholas County, that they weren't allowed to go to any other churches at night, like we call them holy rollers or whatever, but they was always afraid of snake handlers, and they wouldn't let them go. Well, her brothers slipped off one night, and they go to this meeting, and they did have snakes, and they hadn't brought them out yet. They said the crowd was really excited, and they were just singing and jumping around, and the church they had a high row in the back, and these boys were sitting up there on that log seats, and one of the boys pulled off his belt, and he threw it up front right at the feet of the crowd, and he said that they come out of there scared to death, running, and knocked the potbelly stove over, and burnt the whole floor out of the church, almost destroyed the church.
J.G. Bradley was active in West Virginia politics as state Republican Party leader and president of the West Virginia Coal Owners Association. Bradley was in the unique position of being able to influence both government and capital throughout the state of West Virginia.
Mr. Bradley, he was listed on the roll of lawyers for several years, although he never actually actively practiced law. He was elected to multiple Republican national conventions, being a Republican. I mean, that was his family lineage. They were Republicans.
But Bradley, he moved in high circles. You know, he came from a very wealthy background, and he knew his way around. So there's no question that he tried to change the tenor of the political landscape, not just in West Virginia, but the United States in general. They were very set on, in order to keep what they had to buck against what was happening all the way down from D.C., which was the national recovery business, the New Deal. The Wagner Act in 1935 made company unions illegal, for example. It worked against that. Well, they still had one for 20 years after that. I mean, that's the kind of control that he exercised there is almost exceptional in American history.
I'm sure that he believed in things coming from the top down. That's the way it was done then. And he would not be any different. I just think he did it better than most people did, because I think he truly was a very altruistic person.
Always exciting time on election day.
Yeah.
Like I say, Dad was always involved in it, and then my brother, he grew older, he was involved in it. And I can remember Mother had an old trunk that had a lock on it. And I can remember election time when the bottom of that trunk, it had a tray over it, but they'd take that tray up, and the bottom of that trunk would be full of these little bottles of whiskey. And they were small bottles. I don't think they make them I don't know. They were like, what were they, maybe pint bottles?
Probably,
I don't know, maybe
small.
half pint, I don't know. But they used those on election day, they gave them out to people. And they would keep those in that trunk. People didn't know they were there, and then they'd go in and get however how many they needed at the time. And the dollar bills, they would just be stacks of those dollar bills. And we were raised to think that's the way you ran elections. I mean, after the election was over, they were telling me stories about the people they had inside the polls and how they gave signals out the window of the schoolhouse. They voted the schoolhouse.
Now, and you can't politic what is 300 feet of the poles or something. Then they'd right up to the door, and they had somebody in the polling place. They wouldn't pay you till you voted. They had somebody in there they'd watch to see if you voted the way you told them you was going to. And if you didn't get no money when you come back out. It was illegal what they were doing, but that's the way it was. And they wasn't supposed to be nobody in there watching somebody else vote, but the way they worked, they was, because they could tell, and then they'd signal some fellow outside that had the money where to pay them or not. or to give them whiskey or what they want, brought them take the whiskey. But it's the way people never thought nothing of it.
Production in Widen continued to rise to an all-time high by 1950. But the men became increasingly dissatisfied with Bradley's rule and company domination over their bargaining agent, the Widen League of Miners. The miners at Widen walked out on strike in September of 1952, complaining of a lack of health and retirement benefits, such as the contract brokered in 1947 by then head of the UMWA, John L. Lewis.
We read a lot about the violence of southern West Virginia in the 20s. You know, we hear about Blair Mountain and the Matewan Massacre and things like that. But, you know, Widen had its own war in 52 and 53. There were shootings, bombings. You know, a couple trestles were blown up. It was a bad time. Widen was pretty much cut off from the outside world.
In fact, it wasn't in a sense. You know, the state police were called in on occasions, and there was an attempt from the governor down to try to get a hold of the situation. It was so intense, and as you indicate, brother against brother, that it was almost impossible to contain the conflict.
The whole Widen thing started to percolate a little bit, or boil just a little bit down in there, and the coal miners were working down in Widen, and there was a lot of rumbling going on down there, and so ultimately I was assigned actually by Labor's Daily to report on the strike.
Actually, this thing started, they had what they called their own union there at that time. And that consisted of, I think, about 3 men employees at the company. And some of the boys got dissatisfied with the way they was acting, or, you know, it didn't satisfy them. So they decided we would protest the company, not go to the United Mine Workers, but of course, every time anything went wrong at Widen, that the United Mine Workers thought they could take to their advantage, they would try it.
Apparently, it wasn't a matter of the UMW trying to get in, but some of the miners got a hold of Bill Blizzard, and that's the real interesting part of the story here. Is Bill then responded, as was his nature. He never, in all the research I've done, he never turned down any union miner that wanted some help. So they asked for help, and he agreed to help them and became involved in the Widen strike.
We found out that on top of the mountain, right above, was where you start to go down into Widen. You're up on top of the hill there. And so the miners, they had gotten in touch with my father, and he told them, well, why don't you go ahead and have kind of some organizational meeting or something like that on top of that hill. And he says, they asked my father for some help, and he said, oh, yeah. I says, I'll help you. You know, that was my father's meat, that kind of thing. It was his people and all.
Mr. Bradley, I knew him pretty well. He was owner of the company, and one of the owners. And I heard him say one time that before he would operate under a union, he would pull the steel of that 20 miles of railroad.
There were armed guards also, of course, on the railroad going in. This was habitual. The mine guards there, some people down in there that knew who my father was, tipped mine guards that it was my father there. So they stopped the train. And here they were, armed and all of that. So they kicked my father off the train. And he had to walk all the way back out of that pretty long hollow down there. And that gave him a kind of a personal interest in J.G. Bradley and in the Widen coal miner, because he'd been treated pretty badly, he thought.
A fellow by the name of Wilson was a J.P., justice of the peace at that time, I forget. Now, whenever the trouble started, he got a whole bunch of us together and deputized us. If it was legal, I don't really know if it was legal or not.
Historically, it had always been a big drive to unionize southern West Virginia, because unless they could get the coal fields in West Virginia organized, then having them organized in Pennsylvania or Indiana or somewhere else, they could be undercut in their conditions, the wages they asked for. So any exception to unionization would work against all the other union miners. And Widen became the sole holdout in southern West Virginia after the New Deal. After the New Deal brought unionization to the whole of the southern coal fields, Widen was the exception, and they could undercut them. They could ruin the market for them. So they were under a great deal of pressure.
The John L. Lewis, J.G. Bradley struggle should probably be a book or a movie, and I'm sure it has been by different people, but sometimes it was brother against brother. In my family's situation, my grandfather against my dad. My grandfather wanted to go union. My father wanted to stay non-union. So it was split down the middle.
It split up families. Some boys go with the union, and some people stay loyal to the company.
A strike is a little like a minor civil war, in which you have that. In other words, perfectly in West Virginia, perfectly well. We know perfectly well. Not everybody was on the side of Abraham Lincoln and the United States. Not indeed. They were on the Confederacy side and had their own candidate for president and all that kind of thing. So in that sense, it's not surprising that does happen on occasion.
On October 14th, state police charged 11 striking men with the assaults on railroad workers just 10 days earlier. The violence increased in magnitude on October 23rd when dynamite destroyed 2 bridges on Buffalo Creek. The blast not only violated state law, but were also federal offenses as well, because the trains running on the BC&G rail line carried U.S. mail.
The one bridge that they blew up was just a short distance below the town of Widen, maybe a mile or a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles. And it was a short bridge, probably about as long as from here down to the road, all steel bridge, And they put enough dynamite under one end of that to turn that thing completely flip-flop. And somebody knew what he was doing, and they sure put a lot of dynamite under that thing.
They blowed up the bridges, 2 bridges, Sand Fork going down Buffalo. Then there's another bridge they blowed up. Substations, they blowed up 2 or 3 substations. They shot the insulators off the high-powered lines going into Widen. And I remember me and my cousin packing my uncle lunch to him. He doubled over. They had to actually, coal miners would go to the substation. They had made little shacks or little buildings for them to live in out of cross ties. And they would hire, one of the people that worked at Widen, they would, wasn't striking, they would hire them to, or double over to guard the substations. Now, I remember seeing my Uncle Kurt. He had a 30-30 sitting over in the corner of the old little shack he was in.
Later years, I heard them talking about they would put off some explosives, and that kept the guys on guard duty a lot. They made a lot of money on that guard duty, so they had to have something going there to keep that up.
And they was going to lose them pension jobs. See, the only thing they had to do was run down there and sit in their car all day and run around here and there. Well, they had to go back to work. They might blow up something to get hold of their job a while longer. I know that to be a fact. They'll go shoot up somewhere or do something.
I don't think there's a bit of truth in it. No, we was doing the best we could to try to keep things under control. And Mr. Bradley was too, as far as I know.
The violence in the area finally resulted in the death of a company man on May 7, 1953. Around 4:30 a.m., a convoy of company guards drove past the Cook Shack, headquarters of the striking miners. As gunfire broke out, a bullet hit a non-striking miner, Charles Frame, killing him instantly.
Well, he told me that they were in the woods over where the place they called the cook shack, where this incident happened, where my brother was killed, and they were in the woods, and I don't know what happened, but anyhow, there was shooting went on, and my brother was killed.
They had to move out of widen. They just allowed one car up at the junction. The police just allowed one car up at the junction where the road come out of widen. They hit the county road. They only allowed one picket up there, so the union established what they call a cook shack over at Dill in property that belonged to a fellow by the name of Triplett.
I got a call at 5:30 to bring all the ambulances we had available and come to the cook shack. The cook shack was a large block building at Dill, West Virginia, located on the left of the road going north.
They sent guys up there to different guys up on the picket line just to sit up there and just keep trying to move them out on out. And I was one of them, and they furnished whiskey, and you could drink all you wanted.
That the company had organized them a convoy, and they were going to go over and tear the unions, what they called the cook shack, down and run them off. Well, somewhere along the line, the union men had got word of it, and they had set up, the union men was waiting on them.
Charles come there and was drinking whiskey with us. And he said he's going down there and shoot it up at the cook shack, but you couldn't tell nothing about him. His mouth was just going like that. Somebody got a convoy there, started out, and there we went down through there. And I was just drinking. I just got out of the car and got in with Jack Doddo. I was with Jack. And we was about seventh car back. Charles was number one.
Charles Frame was in the lead car, and he was fatally wounded. My brother, Chilton Wilson, and his friend McKinney were in the second one, and they were both shot, not seriously.
Charles had that pistol and took it outside, was shot up in there, and then they were sitting waiting, and they just started riddling that whole bunch. The first 4 cars was really bad. And then our car got right, the windshield went right between me and Jack Dodrell. And it throwed stuff in my stomach. I had to go to the doctor and get it out. Charles, he was hit and run in this big deep ditch to the left right there. About halfway between our house and the first house down here. Blood. It was a pretty long ways, 1/4 mile about it. Well, we met Jack and me, went back up that creek and carried him out and carried him down. Our eagle lived there in that house then, and we took him in there, but he was shot in the head. And he was definitely shot by them.
Well, Roscoe Bales got charged for it, but what come out in the investigation, he was shot with a 35 Remington rifle. I don't know how much you know about a 35 Remington rifle. It's a pretty potent gun. If you shot him in the head, it took his head off. If you had some thing that you didn't like about your neighbor or somebody else, that was a good time to get rid of him. You could just shoot him and somebody would say, well, that was the union. No, that was the company man.
Bales was a little bit related to me, and I knew him well. He was a kind of an odd character. He didn't seem to want any friends, or he not friendly with anybody, I didn't care very much for him.
I talked with him a very great deal because he was going to be on trial, and the state police had gotten a rifle, and they used that as the main evidence actually against him at the time. In other words, somebody was shot, the state police said, with ammunition from that particular rifle, and that they thought he was the only one down there that had one, so that was the principal evidence against him. So I talked with him, that kind of thing, a good deal.
Testimony in the case of the State versus Roscoe Bale records that the first car was just past the cook shack when the victim was shot, and that the car traveled another 300 yards before running into the creek, well past this curve in the road. The evidence in the case seemed to point to only one man, but could it stand up to modern crime scene forensics? For this, we consulted an expert.
My name is Detective Dana Rousey. I'm a detective for the Charleston Police Department, Criminal Investigations Division, and I'm a crime scene investigator. When I first examined the 9 photographs, in a couple of the pictures there was a deceased person shown from the head and shoulders shot, basically. And then I looked at the exterior and interior of the motor vehicle he was said to be driving. There's a strong indication that that man's head wound did not come from that volley of fire, firing from the driver's side to the rear of that vehicle, because that type of injury was going to come from his front or slightly to the right. And I don't see how a person standing, shooting the vehicle could make that shot also.
To me, it was rather simple because there wasn't any bullet holes on the right of the car, or really on the left of the car. The bullet that struck frame came through an open window, which was the driver's side. I think that he was sitting in the driver's seat, turned in his seat, looking to the left and to the back when he was struck.
I really don't think a head and a body can turn that far around, especially when driving. You're going to look out the side view mirror. You may look slightly to the left, but to expose that right temple from the left side of the car, I just don't see that as very likely.
Well, the wound that frame had entered his forehead, approximately here on the right forehead, and exploded at the back of his head.
When I first examined the pictures of him, I noticed in his right temple a small circular defect, which could possibly be a bullet entrance or an exit, depending on what the inside of the skull looks like, basically. I looked at the second photograph and found there to be a larger hole in the back of his head, right at ear level, on the opposite side of his head. And that's usually an indication of an exit wound in comparison to what would be possibly an entrance wound to the right temple on his head.
They had taken him out of the car before I got there and taken him across the road into a Mr. Eagle's house and laid him on I believe on the porch, but he was died immediately from a wound. And I think that the bullet almost had to come through the left on the driver's side, because there was no broken windows anywhere, and it came through an open window, which was, I think, really what happened.
From what I've seen and in my experience in 17 years as a policeman, that the victim, Charles Frame, saw that his vehicle was being shot at, or actually taking fire. He may have sped up and possibly lost control, overcorrected, and landed in a ditch. He stiff-armed the steering wheel and prepared for a crash and broke the steering wheel. That, to me, is a strong indication that he was alive and preparing for a crash. And it looks as if the bullet, if that is an entrance wound and the one in the back of his head is an exit wound, and I've seen quite a few of them, and it looks like a person actually came in or fired from the passenger side of that vehicle into his head.
Anyway, I guess the strike lasted from September 52 up until November of 53, I guess. some history and stuff about the strike and my history stuff there. But it was pretty nasty. It was a nasty strike. I'm serious, Dad. But it never did go union until Clinchfield and Piston and Clinchfield Coal Company took over in 1959. That's when
Bradley sold it in 58.
Yeah, Mr. Bradley sold it to Piston Coal Company in 1958. And it finally, January of 59, that's when Clinchfield took over running the company. And they laid 200 of us off in 1959. January the 1st, Clinchfield laid 200 of, Elk River Coal and Iron Company workers off. And I was one of the 200 that got laid off.
As the years pass, time heals all wounds. Today, the former residents of these three company towns gather at many reunions held each summer to remember the simple life and the good times of days long past.
I've been coming every year for about the last, I maybe missed 2 years out of 10, but I've been coming about every year.
Not that far from Mason County, about 100 or so miles.
About that.
Were you guys raised in this community?
Down the road in Taylor.
All three of y'all are sisters?
Yeah. There was 10.
And there's 10 of you guys? What's your family name?
But just the love, you can see these people today still love each other. Just like the town was a town that trusted and honored each other.
They all seem to be united together, tightly like a family. It was more like a family.
Just have a lot of wonderful memories of coming back and doing things over there. We have a lot of pictures that every picture we had taken has a train in the background.
Well, we'll just finish this up by saying we had some good days. We did. More good times than bad, I swear.
Yeah,
more good times than bad.